Good afternoon. Hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Mr. Johannes Paul van Schayck will defend his academic thesis entitled From Electrons to Proteins to Data, How to Localize, Observe and Organize Them. I would like to invite you to present a summary of your studies and the conclusion of your thesis in the next 15 minutes. And I'd like to give you the word.
Thank you. Dear Pro-Rector, dear Defense Committee, dear family, dear colleagues and friends, in the next 15 minutes, I will give you a brief overview of my thesis entitled From Electrons to Proteins to Data, How to Localize, Observe and Organize Them. Biology is the study of life, and you can do this at widely different scales, from the very large ecosystems to individual organisms. But we need to zoom in further to study the fundamental building blocks of life. Individual cells have the size of about 100 micrometers, or about a tenth of a millimeter. But within these cells, we can find proteins. Proteins are much smaller. They're 10,000 times smaller than a cell. Proteins are built up of molecules and atoms. And if we want to see and study a protein in detail, we need to zoom in further again, 100 times further, down to the level of angstroms, or about a 10 millionth of a millimeter. Only when we zoom in this far, we're able to determine the 3D structure of the proteins. And knowing how a protein looks like tells a lot about the function and working of these proteins. Such knowledge can aid, for example, in the development of medicines and vaccines. For viewing cells, it's possible to use a light microscope. But to view the structure of proteins, we need something else. We need an electron microscope. Electron microscopes were invented in the 1930s. These days, these machines are operated remotely to limit the interference that you can cause as an operator on them. So here you can see me in the middle working on one of these microscopes. Even though they were invented now nearly 100 years ago, their basic principle is still the same. You've got an electron source on top of the microscope and an anode, which then accelerates the electron. Then a couple of lenses, which condense the beam, and then let it pass through the sample. The sample is in the middle of the microscope. After these, this creates the image, and then a subsequent set of lenses will project and magnify this image onto something to view, something to record this image that was just generated. This is called a detector, or a camera. I've now told you something about how an electron microscope works, but I haven't told you yet how we go from a protein sample to a protein structure. This is what I will tell next. We start with a sample in a small tube, and inside of this tube are proteins floating around. But this is not yet how we can place it in a microscope. We need to take a couple of steps before we can do that. So first, we have to place a very tiny droplet on a small metal grid, only a few millimeters in size. And we plunge this into liquid ethane. This is minus 180 degrees Celsius. So this will rapidly freeze and cool the sample. The device that we use for this is the Vitrobot, a machine which was invented here in Maastricht about 20 years ago, and of which a couple of the inventors are still here present in the room. And is now used still worldwide by hundreds of labs. So this gives us our sample in our grid in a small, just a tiny 100 nanometer thick layer in which the proteins are embedded. And we hope that the proteins are then in all kinds of random orientations within this tiny thin layer of ice. This is what we place in the microscope. And from this, the images are projected. And this is almost like shadow images of this 3D protein. And this is what, in the next step, will record the image. So here on the right, you see an example of a micrograph, an image which has been recorded by the microscope and shows you the protein in all kinds of orientations. But we can't suffice with just one image. We need lots of images. We need lots of particles. We need to record thousands of images and up to hundreds of thousands of particles. Because the image is quite noisy, and the protein is difficult to see in these images. So in the next step, we take all these images and we calculate 2D classes from them. We try to combine the particles based on their orientation. And with the help of these 2D classes, it's possible then to reconstruct your protein. To place all the particles in their right orientation, and then from these 2D images, you can reconstruct a 3D map. And this 3D map is not yet the protein itself. Within this is just the electron density representation of the protein. In the subsequent step, we fit the atomic model. Because we know the sequence of the protein, we can fit this atomic model of the protein inside of this 3D map. And from this atomic model, we can help answer questions of how the protein works, what its function is inside the cell and its organism. So we need, like I mentioned, we need hundreds of thousands of proteins and thousands of images. But why is that? That's because there's a couple of fundamental limits in electron microscopy. As you may have seen in the previous images, is that the proteins are difficult to see. And that is because there's only weak contrast being generated by the proteins. And only when you place them a bit out of focus, you can more clearly see them. But, of course, by placing it out of focus, you also lose a bit of detail. The other fundamental limit is radiation damage. The protein is being damaged by the electron microscope, by the electrons passing through it. And this will limit the amount of electrons that you can use, the amount of signal that you can generate. So this means that that every electron that you use counts. And this is where my project starts, and why the detector is of utmost importance for cryo-electron microscopy. And we have investigated the Timepics-3 as a detector. This is a special detector being used in high-energy physics as well, but we investigated for the use for electron microscopy. So like I said, every electron counts. But the other important thing is that every electron should only count once. Electrons are quite happily detected. If you pass them through a semiconductor layer, they will happily leave behind their charge in a charged cloud. But for imaging purposes, we're only really interested in this point of impact, where the electron hits this sensor layer. We don't want to see it in all the other pixels. So I'll tell you a bit about the Timepics. So this is the Timepics-3 hybrid pixel detector, and this is a difficult schematic representation of it. And the only thing I would like you to remember from this is that the electron comes from the top, and it will leave behind electron hole pairs or charge in this semiconductor layer. And this will drift towards the electrode, or the pixels which are down here. So this is a single pixel, this is another pixel, and this is another pixel. And this charge is then, through analog and digital electronics, is being counted. And the Timepics-3 is special in the way that it can count this signal in two different ways. It can measure very precisely when the timing of the electron has arrived, the time of arrival, and it knows how much energy was left behind in this single pixel, the time of a threshold. But before we can use it, we need to take a couple of steps. So here again, you've got your chip, your Timepics-3, and the steps that we need to do is we need to integrate it inside of the microscope. So we had to both do hardware integration, we had to deal with things like cooling, hardware radiation protection, timing between the microscope and the detector, and we also had to do software integration. We had to combine how the microscope works and the software on the microscope works, that works neatly together with the Timepics. Here on the bottom right, you see an image of how this detector here at the bottom is mounted on the bottom of our microscope. So, Timepics-3 in action. This is an image of a very sparse electron beam, so just a few electrons. And we can view individual electrons hitting this sensor layer. But remember that I said that we're only interested in this point of impact. Where does the electron hit? But what you can see is that there's a cluster. There's a number of pixels being hit. There's multiple hits. And there's information from the two channels, this time over threshold and this time of arrival. So how can we find now where exactly in this cluster of hits this electron has exactly hit the sensor layer? That became our question. And what we used for that was a neural network or an artificial intelligence. Unfortunately, within the microscope, it's not possible to know exactly this point of impact. So the method that we choose is that we simulated the detector, and this simulation, from this we had a known incident position, a known position where the electron has hit. And this gave us lots of simulated events, which we could then use to train our neural network model. And this worked. I hope you can appreciate that here on the left, the image is fuzzy, and here on the right, the image is sharp. And this is the effect of the event localization being applied. There's also a way to quantify that, which I won't go in detail, but I hope you can see that the better performance of the detector is the lines here on top. But we still had to then apply this on proteins. So we took our steps of the integration of the detector inside of the microscope, and this is one of the images that we took of individual proteins. In this case, a protein from Mycobacterium tuberculosis. You can appreciate these individual protein particles inside that we took an image of. And we could also reconstruct this towards an electron density map here on the left and fit an atomic model to a resolution of about 3 angstrom. As you may remember from the start, that is a resolution at which you can do this. You can view this, or you can reconstruct the atomic model inside of the electron density map. So this proved that the detector could work. And another work that we did, we could also prove that the detector is a quite versatile detector and can be used for many different applications, like also diffraction and maybe in the future pyrotography, details which I won't go into right now. The other topic that I studied is how we deal with our data. And as you can imagine, during the process of this research, lots of data is generated. Each dataset can be several terabytes inside. And ideally, this data will be available after the research has finished. But this can be quite a challenge. There's several reasons for that. One of them is that, of course, there's not just this single dataset and this single experiment being done. Often to do your research, you need to do multiple types of experiments with many different devices, other microscopes, other databases, other research sources. And you need to combine that. So the type of data can be multimodal. Other issue is that it's often not just one data set that you collect. You could collect multiple data sets. So there's quite a bit of data also to process and quite a bit of data to manage. And finally, what can be a challenge, especially in life sciences, but also in other research fields, is that this is often done by just a few researchers, sometimes even one. So to take an example, Abril, one of my colleagues in the lab, she would perform this entire experiment from start to finish on her own. She would take all steps, and she was also responsible for managing her data. Unfortunately, most research data still gets lost. After a couple of years, for most research, the data is no longer available. And that is unfortunate. It brings along societal costs. It deteriorates the public trust in science. One, because it's not possible to verify. The research data is not available. It's not available for verification of the results that were obtained. And the other thing, it's not available for reuse. So other researchers are not able to reuse their data, and even the researchers themselves are not able to reuse their data. This wastes public money. So a couple of recommendations that I developed during my PhD and while working on the Research Data Management Support Group Data Hub Maastricht. One of them is that technology helps, but technology is not the only answer. there's also people involved. You need disciplinary data stewards, people close to the researchers to support the researcher in helping them manage their data. Preferably is someone who is also a researcher, him or herself. The other thing, what can really help is domain-specific repositories. Domain-specific repositories are places on the internet, online, where you can deposit your data, but they're specific towards a data type, for example, protein data. And this helps annotate your data with a proper metadata. And we could use more of these domain-specific repositories. The other thing, the other recommendation is sharing of software and data. We need to share not only the data, but also the software and the algorithms that we've used to calculate. It's just the data is just one part of the story. It's a huge challenge. There's lots of data being generated. So when in doubt, just focus on the reusable data, on the most reusable data. Don't throw your efforts at data which is maybe not that applicable in the future years, when in doubt. And finally, we need to reward researchers for sharing of their data. This can be through, for example, bonus points on grant applications, or something like an alternative Hirsch index for measuring how well researchers have shared their data. So this brings me to the summary. I've told you something about electron microscopes and how we use those to get to protein structures. I've told you something about research data and the need for sharing and how to do this. And together, these can answer fundamental questions about life. And with that, I would like to return the word to the prorector.
Thank you very much for your clear presentation. You went a little bit over time, but don't worry, we're going to add 2 extra minutes, so you get your 45 minutes of discussion, so there's no worry about this. It was a clear presentation, well illustrated, and we are here in the Corona well interested now to start a discussion. But before we start the discussion, I would like also to introduce here as a scheme our supervision team, who also guided you over the last many years, I would say. For the audience here, straight on the other side of me is Professor Peters. He is Professor in Nanobiology at M4I Nanoscopy here at our university. And in addition, we have here Dr. Lopez Iglesias from the same department, and they guided you, and we will spend later some extra time to Dr. Ravelli, but that's for later, okay? So we're going to start the opposition, and for the students here, the member here in the audience, we have five members in our Corona today, and one of the members will be online. We can see her on the screen, but since you're sitting there, you cannot see on the screen, but she will be viewing when she's going to address some questions. And basically, she is going to start with the questions. So the first opponent who will be starting your opposition is Professor Arts. She was the chair of your assessment committee, and she's professor in systems biology. And I would like to give her the first word to start the opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector. Dear candidates, I would like to start by congratulating you with this great achievement of completing this beautiful thesis with such a widely diverse range of topics. That's really impressive. And I would like to talk to you about chapter 5 to start with, which is about research data management. And here you present the results of a case study where you analyze the work of Data Hub, also from your own perspective. And there are a number of really interesting observations in this chapter, I believe. And what I would like to specifically address with you is the R in FAIR, so reuse. The article is mainly written from the data generator perspective, and that is very understandable, given that you have been generating data yourself as well. But what I miss a little bit is reuse from the user perspective. So is it actually known how much reuse of these data that are in the Data Hub repository, for example, is taking place?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and your question. Reuse part of the FAIR principles is something that we do not measure. We did not measure directly at the time, from the Maastricht data repository. This is something that was on our wish list to introduce, but we were lacking the software and to generate these statistics. So we do not know the exact number of this reuse, but I agree with you that this would have been very applicable to address also in this paper, but unfortunately we were not able to. I could speculate on the reuse, and I'm not sure if that's something that you would like me to do, but I could.
Please, yes, that would be great.
I would speculate on the reuse, and we also know from after this publication is that the reuse was indeed quite low of the data, and the data was being deposited, but how much reuse there was probably quite low. And we speculated that it might even be an incentive to know how much reuse there is, because a researcher would then be able to tell, look, see, my data is being reused by this particular person or by this group, and that would be provide an incentive to do even better next time.
That's exactly where I wanted to go. Yeah, so because in your general discussion you talk about carrots and sticks for people to make sure that they do share their data. Could reuse from a user perspective be used as a carrot? And you're actually saying that you had considered that. So which aspects or metrics should we use or develop in order for reuse to serve such a goal? I mean, how could we do that in a practical way? When would it be a carrot?
Yeah, so if you look this from a broader perspective, obviously citations on papers, that is something that works, and citation on data would also something that works, and which I have encouraged also other researchers to do, is to properly cite datasets whenever they use them. So that could rightly fit into the existing schemes. I think with the challenge with data is that sometimes you may be reusing hundreds of data sets, and then there's also a bit of a practical issue with how do you cite hundreds of data sets in your paper. So I think we need some extra technology also to deal with that. And I think this call back to the researcher that deposited the data, that their data is being used, would also be very applicable. I think it's a pity that, for example, DataCite is hiding or is not allowing researchers to quickly view this at the moment, while they technically do have this information.
Should we go even further? So not only citation of data sets, but perhaps even offer the original data generators co-authorships, or perhaps ask funders to demand reuse of existing data sets when someone wants to start a new project?
I think that's it could be a solution, but I would be a bit worried that you might be this sort of mandate would be a bit too harsh on researchers. I think it's indeed a pity that not more often we start our research with doing a thorough search of existing data sets. We do maybe a search for existing papers, but not so much for existing data sets. And I think that could be improved.
Okay, thank you. Then I would like to proceed with proposition 6. So perhaps you can ask one of your paronyms to read it out loud.
It is cheaper, possibly better, and certainly easier to store samples in a freezer than records on a disk.
Thank you. So here you refer to the costs of making data fair. At least that's what I assume, because simply storing data without context can't be that expensive, or am I wrong?
that can still be very expensive if we would consider our data sets that are part of this paper, of this thesis. That's, I think, in total about 10, 12 terabytes of data. And storing this on spinning disk brings you about a cost of a yearly cost of about 1,500 euros. Then over the 10-year period that you would at minimum need to store it, it's 15,000 euros. That's half a salary, yearly salary. So, well,
Yeah.
nearly. Depends perhaps on the person. So no, so it's certainly cheaper, I think.
So it's already the money. Yeah. Okay.
For sure.
So let's talk a little bit more about money. Because in chapter 5, again, you give credit to NWO for increasingly funding digital infrastructure. And as a science domain board member of NWO, I'm always very happy to hear that. However, NWO would like the universities to contribute more to infrastructure. And that is really difficult because digital infrastructure is not a prestigious, shiny machine. Also, I noticed that in fact you have a patent for some equipment, but at the same time you make your data and software freely available for everybody to use. So when it comes to digital infrastructure, we have no prestige, no income, and we give everything away for free. So how can we solve this? What would be a feasible business model?
Yeah, I don't think science should be a business model per se. I think, and I think the fact that we have this patent indeed on this particular invention that we made is more of a requirement from the company that was also involved, and that was our own desire to patent this.
Okay.
Having it patented allowed us, of course, to deposit all data because the invention itself was patented, so we didn't have to put any embargoes on that. I think long term, the sharing and the making research data available should be possible to include in grant applications. I think it's a pity at the moment that it's often excluded from grant applications, which makes it difficult to fund this. And maybe a solution could be that we work with lump sums to at the end of the project where you would pay one time for your data set to be stored for the entire lifetime of the data set and then be done with it. So it could easily fit in the grant schemes. And it would be clear for the funder when to, how to pay for it.
Thank you. I think in view of time, I have to give back the word to the pro-rector, and I thank you very much for these interesting discussions.
You observed it very well. Indeed, there was time to proceed to the next opponent, which will be Professor Dumontier. He's professor of data science at our university and was also a member of the assessment committee. I'd like to give him the word.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector. Dear candidate, I want to first take the opportunity to commend you and your supervisory team on this excellent thesis. Excellent because it spans not only highly technical hardware and software components of microscopy, of cryo-EM single particle detection, but also reaching the ambition of not just research data management for your projects, but actually for the whole of the university. And I think that's a very impressive total contribution during your tenure here. It also gave me the opportunity to reflect a little bit as when I was an undergraduate student doing transmission electron microscopy and remembering the kinds of problems that you face, this degradation of the tissue as you imaged it, and fondly in some parts and sort of hankering in others. But I would like to first start, and of course, as one of the co-founders of the FAIR principles, it's necessary for me to investigate a little bit more about the research data management part of it. In chapter 3, you do quite a bit of work here to prepare your data for consumption by the scientific community. And I wondered, and you mentioned the name of your colleague, Abril, as individuals who are able to go from the starting point all the way through the production of the data. And you are a very technically savvy individual. And I wondered, can anybody do this today? Can all of our researchers make fair data in the manner that you have done?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and your question. I think the simple answer to your question is no. I think that's not possible.
Oh, I see.
What I argue in my thesis is that these disciplinary data stewards are required, and Barend Mons is also one of the FAIR founding fathers of FAIR, has once said that we need about 10, on every 10 researchers, we need 1 data steward. That would be quite a few data stewards that you would need. But I think this knowledge, the specialized knowledge to how to make the data fair, on the one hand would be very nice if everyone would be able to do that. But I think on the other hand, there's still many technical challenges with that. I hope some of those will be overcome, but I think at the moment we still need the expertise.
Yes, but perhaps. But in your case, especially in the context of the lab, the experiments are, let's say, largely the same, or at least in the same line. Should it not be possible to train the members of the group to do the full research data management life cycle?
I think one of the things that I've noticed is that research is never the same. So everyone is doing their own experiments. And by definition, these experiments are new, and otherwise they wouldn't be done. And they face new challenges in managing of their data.
Sure, but there are standards that we have developed. For instance, PDB structures for the 3D structure. You have other forms of reporting that have now been standardized. Is that not sufficient? Do we not need to only train our people as to how to do this, as they would to operate a cryo-electron machine?
Yeah, I think that in the end, that's the only way to scale it, is to, because I think the one dedicated data steward per 10 researchers is asking too much. And I think the way to scale it is, for example, these disciplinary or domain-specific repositories, because they are more closer towards what the researcher knows, and they know which metadata can be attached to that. So I think those are very important to scale the research data management towards a larger group, and I think they can help with making it, helping individual researchers in that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Professor Arts spoke a little bit about the problem of getting the data out and reusing other people's data, but I wanted to actually pick up on one of your propositions, and if I can ask one of your panelists to cite proposition number 2.
Reproducing research with its data but without accompanying software is like trying to bake a bread without an oven. This is.
Yes, thank you. I think this is a particularly interesting proposition because, of course, we can describe the provenance of those data, but from the purpose of reproducibility or even be able to compare results, it's often useful to have the original software that were involved. But perhaps you can explain a little bit to us what effort is there in trying to archive or otherwise make software available for others to reproduce research results or to amend them or to apply them to new situations?
Yeah, the challenge of that is I would say quite big. There's multiple aspects to that. For one, software can be proprietary, which makes it difficult with licensing, or that it costs money to get the software for someone to reuse it. The other thing is that often these software are used are part of a workflow. Our steps are taken in this software, and it's not possible to record these steps that you've taken. So you've clicked around, so to speak, in the software, and you've done steps, but what exactly is not recorded and cannot be replayed by someone else. this is to exist, more or less applies to existing software. Then there's the challenge of that if software is combined, so if you use multiple pieces of software, in which order did you use the software? That's a challenge. And I think then the challenge, if you write your own software, if you write, for example, your own Python scripts to do this, is then these Python scripts are often using libraries, and these libraries may change over time, and so you need to know the exact versions, you need the exact context of this, where this application is running. You need to be able to record that. And from my own experience, I can tell that the world of software is changing so fast, is that trying to run your own software only a couple of years later can be a challenge, just to get all your libraries and everything to work again. And the results may differ by using different libraries.
Sounds like a complicated problem. But is there a solution?
I think there's not one solution to this, unfortunately, at the moment. So there is, of course, partial solutions, and I think people would containerizing software in Docker or Singularity would be a solution. But also there, I know from personal experience that this is absolutely not covering everything, and this works now for software maybe in the past 10 years. But if we go further back, it becomes even more challenging. And I've seen people trying to run software from old CD-ROMs and on old emulators, and it becomes the challenge becomes bigger and bigger.
Sure, but do I have one more time? No. Oh. What a pity for me, but many thanks for answering my questions.
I'm really sorry, but we have to proceed. Okay? And we move forward to Professor Verhagen. He was a member of your assessment committee, and he's professor of clinical physics research at our university, and I'd like to give him the word.
Thank you very much. Dear Mr. Candidate, this was quite a spectacular thesis I found, and I was also very happy to learn that on the same campus where we work in radiotherapy, there are also other people who use Monte Carlo simulations with the same software that we are using, and also things like time-pix detectors, which we are also using, but for a totally different application, which I found very fascinating. I would like to ask you some questions about the physics of the detector itself, and maybe before that, the choice of the detector. So you took this time-pix 3, very novel detector, but you're trying to image objects of 0.3 angstrom, if I remember correctly. It's very small. These pixels in the detector, they're like 55 microns. So my first question when I saw that, I thought, that's way too coarse to see anything. Now, I saw how you focus the beams, etc., but can you explain that a little bit better, why this 55 microns is sufficient for your purposes?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and your question. So the hard work is being done by the microscope in this case. So the microscope with the second set of lenses does the magnification and projection of the image on top of this detector. So this detector is about the size of a centimeter, about this size, and this image is being magnified also to this size with the pixels then representing or having a pixel size of about, we would typically use 1 angstrom pixel size, so the 55 microns of the detector would be 1 angstrom of the image.
Because I read somewhere, but I may misquote you now, that the magnification was 250, but that's 250,000, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah. Then your choice of detector, you picked silicon and not cadmium telluride or cadmium zinc telluride, which has a broader energy response and would be interacting more, I think, with the electrons in your energy range, around 100, 300 kV, right? And then the thickness of your detector, 300 microns, if I remember.
Yeah.
So you make the electron stop in the detector. But when I see your little drawing of the electron coming in, and you also said it in your presentation, the only thing you want to know is the point of impact. But is that the case? Do you also not want to know the angle, because you don't need to project that back? And then when I see the electrons, we know that in our field as well, they straggle all over the place. Is there any information in the total energy deposited by these particles and where they deposit it, because it seems like you're trying to measure that, but I have the feeling there's no information in that extra for you.
Yeah, so I think there's multiple parts to that question. I think first of all the choice of the material, so silicon as semiconductor material, and indeed you can go to calcium telluride or gallium arsenide or something else, and others have been trying that, but that the energy that we're using, so 200 kilo electrovolt, that was the one that we applied. We also applied 300 kilo electrovolt, but mostly 200. At 200 kilo electrovolt, even in cadmium telluride, it's still, the charge cloud still spreads beyond 1 pixel, so we haven't solved that problem. And there's also the problem is that for semiconductors, there's the crystallization of the semiconductor is imperfect for cadmium telluride. And there's also cooling issues, so others have been working on that. And it may be a future avenue, but it's our choice for silicon was to prevent these problems. The information, so we have got this charge cloud indeed, or these possible paths that the electron has taken, and this actually helps us in our case. So the entire electron is being absorbed in this semiconductor, in the sensor layer. And that's the reason why we chose this 300 micrometers, to make absolutely sure that it is being absorbed fully. But then the cluster gives us information. It gives us information on where possibly it could have the incident position. Your question about can we, maybe I'm not sure. Was your question that could we also use the energy is being deposited and we count it?
Exactly, because I heard you say in your presentation, the only thing we want to measure is the X and Y of the impact. Yeah. So then I would say what happens to the electron next is of no relevance, right? Because another question that is hidden in there is the electrons, they start out quite monoenergetic in the top of the
extremely
device.
Monoenergetic.
Yeah. And then they go through the sample. Does that then degrade the energy a lot? And is that information that you would like to have? Or?
Well, you would like, but unfortunately there we reach, I think, also a fundamental limit. So people do energy-filtered transmission electron microscopy, and then they so the monochromatically of the beam, it's the energy spread of the beam is I think for our microscope in order of electron volts, and I think there's microscopes that go down to milli-electrovolts or even less. And the energy resolution of our detector is in the order of kilo-electrovolts. So there's a huge gap there, and so theoretically you would like to be able to measure the energy of the electron, because you can make use of that information, and we have tried that. But what we could quickly see is that the spread is way too large to make any use of it.
And besides the X and Y coordinate, the angle is not relevant to know where the electron comes from, or?
Yes, again, it's known, but I think again that is in the millirads, and again we're glad that we can point the incident position. I think measuring the angle, unlike high energy physics where people use stereoelectrovolts or your cyclotron, where also the energy is much higher. I think it's not possible with this.
Then. Maybe one or two short questions about your neural network. You say, okay, there is no gold standard data. Yeah, you should need something like a super ideal detector or so for that. Doesn't exist. So you used Monte Carlo simulations, and I think that's quite novel in itself. But then it becomes, of course, very important to model your beam as accurately as possible. And there, I couldn't find all the details that I was interested in. Could you describe a little bit more the Monte Carlo simulations?
So we made heavy use, of course, of an existing publication, of which the software was luckily shared by us, and this is called Jan4 Medipic. So this was already an adaptation of Jan4 to do the simulations specifically for Medipic. So this includes already the analog and the digital front end of the detector, and it also importantly includes the drift speed of the hole pairs that are in the semiconductor. It's also something that Jan4 cannot do, and this was validated for Timex3 on X-rays, low energy X-rays. And yeah, of course, we then apply it to much higher energy electrons. And yes, there's sort of a risk there. And I think if I would need to redo this, I think you could improve the simulations there as well.
And a final short question, were you simulating secondary photons as well?
Yeah, so Jan4 does that.
But the question is, were you doing that?
So they were included. I think the chances of these secondary photons then inside of the semiconductor also leaving behind charges, we didn't do that, so we left those out. I think the chances of that by heart are pretty low.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Not relevant to the overall.
Thank you very much. I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much. Then the opposition will be continued by Dr. Wollstonecroft. She is affiliated as assistant professor at the Department of Bioinformatics at the Leiden Institute of Advanced Computer Sciences. And of course, I also like to thank you for joining this afternoon and coming all the way from Leiden, CQ, Amsterdam to attend this meeting. I give you the word.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dear candidate, first of all, congratulations on a fantastic thesis. As already discussed, there are not many people who could have achieved everything that you've achieved in this thesis. It's a very broad set of topics. They come together perfectly, and your skill set, therefore, is really quite a unique one, I would say. Now, yeah, I very much enjoyed reading it. I was much more, well, not interested, but my expertise, I think, lie towards the end of your thesis, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about chapters 5 and 6. We've already covered some of the ground before, but I think I have some different angles to discuss with you. So my first question is about a quote that you have in your thesis from Professor Christine Borgman. If data sharing is the answer, what is the question? So this is a very thought-provoking statement from Professor Borgman, and it really talks about how sharing data without context is, of course, straightforward but expensive, as we've already discussed, but sharing data well takes a lot of effort, and you took a lot of effort to share your own data. The work that you did with the Data Hub shows again the effort that is required to actually do this well. Now, I like the pragmatic approach that the Data Hub takes with this, and I like that you say you focus on the reusable data, the data that would have the highest value for reuse. And you say that the domain data stewards help identify what this reusable data is. Now, from my point of view, I would say it's really hard to know which data would be the most reused and have the highest value. So my first question is really, what are the criteria here for identifying reusable data?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and your question. Yes, I think in essence you're right, and you can't determine the amount of reuse from when you start your research that you can expect. But I think you quite quickly can identify certain studies being done as a data steward within the research that you're supporting that certainly are aimed towards more research. So whenever, especially when things are being done systematically or a systematically done experiment in a way that generates, you could determine that yes, this is going to be a data set which is really reusable. And also when I look at my own thesis, I think there are experiments in there which are really focused towards answering a single question, and then I don't think there's and I could give you examples of this where I think the reuse is pretty low. And I think for a data source which is close to the resources, it's possible to determine this at least when faced with too much choice. I think it's possible. Yeah.
Okay, so related to that, if you focus on the data that's most reusable, where does reproducibility fit into this? If you don't put as much effort onto some other data sets, do you have reproducible results?
So if I understand your question correctly, you're asking, is reproducibility at risk because we're not sharing then all data? Is that your question?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, then maybe then to point towards a specific data from my thesis, where we had our microscope and we were testing the stability of the detector inside of the microscope, and we were testing for vibrations more or less using a technique, and I think the reuse of this particular piece of data is quite low because it's only applicable to our setup. And yeah, what else are you gonna do with it? The experiment itself, you could easily repeat anywhere else, the setup. But this particular piece is not really useful. I think for the verification, it might be. In this case, yes. If without sharing it, it's not possible to verify it, and you've only got a couple of images then in the thesis or in the paper. That's the risk that you then run. But again, being faced with too much, that's sort of the point I'm trying to make. When faced with too much.
Yeah, I completely understand the pragmatism here, and I applaud it. I think it's the only way you can do this. I want to stay with the Data Hub. In your thesis, figure 5.1 shows the growth of the data in Data Hub and the growth of the users and the projects. This is tremendous. There's a lot going on, and this is what you would like to see. Could you tell me a little bit more about the patterns of use of the Data Hub? Is it that certain users represent most of the data that's in the Data Hub, or is it spread more evenly through the 10 departments that are represented?
Obviously, what we're showing in this graph is a volume of data. I think that's a very one-dimensional aspect of the data, and I'm not very happy when people just report the volume, and I try to prevent that myself. But in this case, we used it in that graph. Because indeed, it's very easy for a single user to generate lots of data in volume, but not in data sets or within those data sets in actual value within that. What we know from sort of, we were supporting users in using Data Hub, so we had a feel of how much, who was using it and by how much. Indeed, the main bulk was coming from the data stewards that were active. And I think also something I haven't mentioned yet is that also when the PIs are involved and behind the ID, that's also a very important driving force. It's not so much a carrot, but more a stick, of course. If the PI says to the students, you shall deposit your data, but it's one that works and one that we see works. So I think those two, if you look a bit into this usage, that's what we were seeing, driven by data stewards and driven by PIs.
Okay, thank you. No more time, but thank you very much for answering my questions.
Thank you very much, and we have to proceed till the last opponent of today. It's Dr. Jacobi. He is assistant professor at the Department of Bio-Nanosciences at Technical University in Delft, and I also would like to thank him that he joins and took the effort to come from Delft all the way to Maastricht. And I'd like to give you the word.
Dear candidate, I also really enjoyed your thesis, and I want to congratulate you and your supervisory team on this work. I want to take the discussion a little bit back from the data to the electron that is at the origin of that data. In chapter 2, you describe your convolutional neural network that you use to localize the electron events on the sensor of your detector. And you show that you can do this with sub-pixel accuracy using simulated data that you use to train this network. And I was wondering, and later on in your thesis you show that even though you can predict this with sub-pixel accuracy, it seems that if you don't use the super resolution scheme, you seem to obtain similar results. And maybe that could have to do with the fact that you're training on simulated data, and your experimental data obviously is different, so maybe your network may not be generalizable enough to that experimental data. So I was wondering if you've been considering using variational schemes of your convolutional neural network, for example, using Monte Carlo dropouts to not get deterministic prediction of your electron event, but maybe an uncertainty associated with that. Would that be useful?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and your question. Maybe just to reflect on your question, are you referring in your initial part towards the fact that we saw that when just using the non-neural network methods, for example, the highest TUA method, that this was also working very well?
Yes.
Yes, this was. Of course, we were expecting this highest TUA method to work very well because it was the closest that you can sort of argue would work, because the hole pairs are then still high in the sensor layer, and so the signal to arrive the latest, highest TUA, the latest TUA, closely reflects then to the incident position. I think what was most surprising in that finding is that the neural network just trained on the TOT, so just trained on the energy, was performing so well. I think that was a surprising finding there, and I think still an intriguing one. Your question about generating, so we're generating a deterministic neural network, which was just giving basically two floating points with the answer of what we predicted. Unfortunately, in our hands, in our lack of experience with neural networks, we were not able to come up with a non-deterministic neural network. And this is an avenue that I would think would still be very interesting. And I think other research groups have now taken this approach, now applied to MAPS detectors, so to the conventional direct electron detectors, and have used this to great success. And I think that would be would also work on the TimePix data. I think there was a third part to your question.
I think it answers my question, yeah. I think an easier way to do that could be to just drop out some of your convolutional layers and see how your hyperparameters are generalizable. That's a simple way to look at it. But I had another question. On chapter 3, you describe your event-based detector workflow that you apply to single particle analysis. And I'm really excited, just as you are, by this new detector. And I wonder about your thoughts on where do you see the biggest benefit of these detectors? Is that on single particle analysis? Is that for tomography? Is that for new schemes to do biological imaging using electrons?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that I've struggled with that question. Where would you apply the TimePix? I think what we show is that hybrid pixel detectors are very versatile, very useful in electron microscopy. It's unfortunate that no one has yet developed a hybrid pixel detector aimed specifically at electron microscopy. I think if even Vectris uses basically their X-ray synchrotron detectors for electron microscopy, I think if you would focus TimePix 3 and throw away some of the stuff that is being used for high energy physics and would slim it down towards electron microscopy, that would really help. You could up the field of view easily. You could decrease the pixel size, which would still help. Unfortunately, the development cost of something like that is several million euros at least.
That's peanuts for companies that are selling every detector for several million euros, right? So why, if that's the case, why do companies not pick up on this technology?
I think first of all, because they're also selling the microscopes. I think that's. I think it's really unfortunate that this monopoly has arisen within the electron microscopy by Thermo Fisher, and that limits a bit of the competition as well. And so they sell, the detectors with their most expensive microscopes,
So would it not be better for us as a research community to then put the money that we spend on those detectors into a spin-off that basically develops the Timepex technology for electron microscopy?
I would applaud that idea. It's not something that I'm gonna, at the effort I'm gonna take up.
Okay, thank you. Do I have another question? Time for another question? Maybe to move on to chapter 4, where you show that basically when a sample is exposed to an electron beam, you have a rapid evolution of a charge state, and you elegantly image this using a defocused diffracted beam, which you see to change in size, which means that it's changing in focus. And you use that to describe how conductive materials are improving imaging. But I wonder that finding by itself, what does that mean for the way that we do image processing currently? Are we doing anything wrong in the way that we are doing image processing at the moment?
I hope I understood your question correctly, in that what you're asking is the amount of defocus that we're applying that is changing while we're imaging?
Yes.
Yes, I think that is something that is for sure happening, and I think the graphene layer that we apply to our grid could help in that very much. I think also then the CTF correction algorithms you need to take care with this.
I agree. So if you don't have a graphene layer, probably we should do a dose-dependent defocus correction.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Do I still have time for another question? Also related to chapter 4, so you're showing that graphene obviously helps prevents this effect, but you also show that if you're imaging with a little bit of carbon inside your field of view, the effect is reduced to almost the same amount. And given the hassle that it takes to make good graphene grids, would the better solution not just be to always take images with a little bit of carbon or gold in your images?
Yes, and I think that's what we all have been doing. I think even to the point where we did not, or forgot, or did not know why we were doing this. I think the applying, so especially when...
Mr. Candidate, you are allowed to finish your answer, but you don't have to. You also can say it's finished.
I think I can't answer this question in a short sentence.
Okay, thank you. Then we just finish. Thank you very much. So basically, Mr. van Schayck, the time appointed for your thesis has now passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss not so much the quality of your thesis, that has been approved, but we will discuss the quality of your defense this afternoon. I request that you and your company will await the results of all our deliberations and our return to this room. Thank you very much.
Please all rise.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you won the battle once you've grown. South side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die.
Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Dear Mr. Johannes Paul van Schayck, to call it officially, okay? The degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis, but in particular we discussed the way you have defended your thesis. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you officially the degree of doctor. Professor Peters is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with our Dutch Customs University. I invite your supervisor now to take the floor, and I'd like to give him the word.
Please all rise.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, do you promise to work accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
I promise.
By the authority vested by us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Johannes Paul van Schayck, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by law and custom. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university.
I will give the word to Professor Peters to speak out the laudatio.
Thank you very much, Pro-Rector. Dear Paul, dear Dr. Paul, about 9 years ago, you came to our institute at the age of 28. Now you're 37. I would like to also congratulate the parents and Pauline with this fantastic, memorable moment for your son and husband for this very special day. You did a really great job. On the 25th of February in 2015, Paul, I found your first email in my inbox. And you were working with Pim Schavendijk at the Rijkswan, a seed company. And before that, you studied in Delft a little bit, but primarily in Wageningen, in biotechnology. And you came to us as a person that would love to carry out research and work in the infrastructure of data management. And Raymond, who actually should speak out today as the laudatio, is unfortunately not with us, but I'm sure that I will speak on behalf of Raymond, but also on behalf of Carmen, that we all agree that you were with us from the very, very first moment and were very instrumental in building up our infrastructure and institute and team building. And the team building started already by you introducing a shared calendar for all of us a few months later, so that we knew from each other what we were doing. And another few months later, you and Raymond were the initiators of the St. Nicholas event that happened every year again, where you talked about Zwarte Piet. At that time, that was still a possibility. And I was giving lectures, and the YouTube movies were on the screen all the time. And I wanted to introduce a YouTube movie in my PowerPoint. And I had no idea how to do this. So knowing that Paul knew all this quite well, I asked Paul for advice. And as always, he was very helpful, So he sent me the link of a clip converter. And when I copied my YouTube movie in the clip converter, I was quite surprised because I saw the option of 3 ladies that I could find that very same evening in a hotel room somewhere in Maastricht. So I thought, wow, what is Paul doing here? But Paul said, don't worry, this is just advertisement. The clip converter works well, that is the key thing. So that was that, Paul. And then you were also active with the PhD defense of Pavel, and I hope that Pavel is here with us. He was the very first PhD. Hello, Pavel. He came all the way from Zurich last night to attend this meeting. We don't need to talk much about all your work. You gave a fantastic talk, and all the committee members agreed that you had an outstanding defense, like an outstanding thesis. So we don't need to go into detail. And for those who didn't get the point, I think this detector, which wouldn't cost 3 million euro as the current detector is doing under a microscope of 6 million, but Paul's aim is also to develop a detector of a few €100,000 under an 800,000 microscope that would be useful then for all people all over the world, rather than only the very few rich laboratories that are currently using this expensive infrastructure. And your contribution to this was significant. So that's that. Now I'd like to change my topic somewhat and go to your non-scientific skills, Paul, because I think you have things that are more important for success than intelligence. And I have put together 8 of those skills. And you may like to hear what I think, and I hope that Carmen agrees with me, of the skills that I put together this morning for your work. One is that the number 1 skill, according to me, is stepping over your borders. You have shown in the past, you go from Delft to Wageningen, and then to a company, then to a work in us institute, our institute, that you are capable of stepping over borders and not being afraid to look for new horizons and take the challenge. And you did that really well. And for most of you, I believe you know that Paul is at the moment working at the KNMI in the build, looking to the weather forecast and using all the knowledge that he used in our laboratory to make next steps there. You're also, number 2, a team worker. You're very good in setting up collaborations and initiating with other people what is important and how to work together and making them feel important. And that is something that you are very good at. And therefore, number 3, you earn trust and confidence. And there is also confidentiality in the conversation, which makes it even more important. And therefore, it's very easy to share with you the real, authentic feelings, because it is in good hands. And we have been sharing a lot of feelings with each other in the past few years, and I've always appreciated that. And that resulted in a kind of a good friendship that we had, besides you being a PhD candidate in our laboratory. So you win the hearts and minds, and you increase visibility. And that is something that you will be doing in the future. And that is a really important skill, I'm sure. You have originality of thought. You come up with ideas that nobody had in the laboratory, and boom, Paul is there, and he brings a new item in the field, and that gives excitement. You're good in management, Paul. You really not only help yourself in management, but you help also an entire team in a management, and not an entire team. Pascal, I hope he's here too, he will agree, hello Pascal, that it is also the faculty of medicine where you helped in management of data processing and making data stewards excited about your ideas. And for that you need intellectual initiative. And I really can tell you, you have intellectual initiative. So I'm coming to my last skill that I would like to share with you all, and that is perseverance. you are somebody with perseverance and you like challenge. And if the challenge is at a high bar, I know that you love it and that you go for it and that you focus, but that you, besides the focus, also take care of your family and your Pauline and the 2 children, because always when we had conversations, Pauline and the 2 children were also in your mind. And especially when they were born and when the moment was a bit critical, you were there for them all the time. And you had a good way of balancing your private life as well as the work at lab. And in addition, you even took time to help your father in making a nice little home for the bakery, which I haven't yet tasted, but I would love to do that in the near future. So with that, I think that I spent my 4 or 5 minutes. I wish I could speak a bit longer, but I won't do more. This is the essential, Paul. And as I mentioned, we dearly, dearly miss Raymond in this event. And therefore, we got permission from the rector even, and from the pro-rector, for you to finish this PhD defense in a little bit unusual way, because normally that is not happening. But for this special occasion, we take a few minutes extra. But I give the word back to the pro-rector.
Thank you very much. And indeed, like was mentioned by Professor Peters, I'd like to give you the words, because you're going to speak a little bit about one of the members of your promotion team who cannot be here anymore, and you like to speak a little laudatio about Dr. Ravelli. I'd like to give you the word.
Yeah. Thank you, Pro-Rector. Thank you, Peter. This thesis would not have been possible without the help of all of you. I'm honored and forever grateful to have met so many wonderful people over all these years. Thank you. But there's one person in particular I would like to mention right now. This is Raymond. Raymond was my daily supervisor and later promoter of my thesis, and my friend. We worked for nearly 8 years together on this project. Sorry. We worked for nearly 8 years together on this project. This project wouldn't have existed without him, and I certainly wouldn't have finished it without him. I'm forever grateful to him. Raymond was supposed to be sitting right there, on that chair, alongside Peter and Carmen. To our deepest regret, he's not here. I'm forever grateful for the years that we spent together and everything he has taught me. In his honor, I would like to read a poem now. This is also the poem that appears on the first few pages of my thesis. The character in the poem reminds me of Raymond. The poem is in Dutch. De elektronenmicroscopist. Een stroom van negatieve golven schiet als hagel door de loop om het ongekende doel te raken. De steekvlam van een lege draken martelt de materie en verdampt de tijd tot lege uren in de jacht naar het onbekende. Dan gebeurt het lang verwachte. Uit de golven spoelt iets aan. Op de oevers van de wetenschap, de jutter, blij verrast, houdt de schelp aan zijn oor en ergens in de verte klinkt het geruis van iets heel nieuws. Het nieuwe resultaat smult en fonkelt haar gelaat. Laat de vlinders stiekem vrij in de hemel van haar buik. Ze glimt, onzichtbaar, in de leegheid van het lab. Vanavond zet zij een minuscule stap. Ze zucht, als was ze zelf het lege draken. Shock dan de schemergangen door. Aan het eind treft zij een blik, die ook grijze beelden bewaakt. Op zoek naar een stip, een beweging, een sprankje poëzie, die deze avond anders maakt. Want dan moet hij zich spoeden door dezelfde schemergangen van de ongewisse wetenschap. Maar nee, hij draait alleen zijn blik. Kijk, sprak hij, daar is het onverwachte, onbekende.
Dank u wel. En ik denk, ik wil toch even stilte en even een applaus voor bij de laudatio. Even rust. En dank jullie wel. Nu zijn we natuurlijk geswitcht naar het Nederlands, maar ik switch terug naar het Engels, want er zijn een groot aantal mensen in de zaal die Engels praten. So I switch to English for the people in the audience, because that would be nice. And of course, first of all, Dr. van Schayck, how does that feel? Well, the body language is clear about this. It feels great, and I would like to congratulate you also on behalf of Maastricht University, our board of deans. And in my congratulations, I also would take your promotion team, who also guided you over, I know now, almost the last 9 years, which is quite a long time. I would like to congratulate also your family, who's sitting here in the front. A great job. We have discussed this, and I can tell you we were all unanimously agreed that it was a great thesis presentation and a thesis defense. I also would like to thank the members of the Corona who came from Leiden, Amsterdam, from Delft, that they really joined us today, but also the members from Maastricht and the online Professor Arts, that they joined this thesis defense today and took the time to do this. I also would like to mention that you do have, I wrote something here down for myself, I was impressed by your acknowledgement in your thesis. When I read it a couple of days ago, I noticed, well, he knows many people. And now I can see here in this full audience that most of them have joined today. And I noticed that you are a good networker, because that's what has happened over here. It was already mentioned by Professor Peters, you're moving to the KNW, no, to the KNK and AMI, to the weather station. So basically, I thought you move from macro, you move from micro to macro. You move from electron microscopy to the weather. And you also use, and that I understand, artificial intelligence. So yesterday, just a little chat, yesterday I decided, can I find him on the web? So I used ChatGPT and to see if I can find you in the weather stations there, and I was asking ChatGPT, what kind of weather will Paul get tomorrow at his PhD? And to my surprise, I got a full text over there that it would be beautiful sunny weather in Maastricht, and that it would be enjoyable for you. So you did a good job. Thank you very much. Well, by that, I'm going to close this defense officially. I have a hammer for this, as you can see over here. I close this defense, and I would like to tell you how we're going to proceed. I understand there is no reception here at the rafter, but you're going to the, in Dutch, the tramhalte. So I think most of you have to do a little walking, and we will stay here for a little moment. We're going to make a picture in the hall here, together with Professor Arts in the background, who will be on the big screen later, and we're going to make a picture on the stairs, and then basically we follow you later. You don't have to wait for us. You already can start walking to the tramhalte and start to enjoy with some coffee, tea, or whatever is available. And the candidate, the new young doctor, will follow you shortly. And I would like to thank all of you for your attendance, and I would like to mention the PhD students who are sitting here in the audience. I can see some of them. This is a good defense. This is basically standard what we like to see over here. Okay, thank you.